many of us football fans, the days, weeks, and months leading up to the NFL draft, our timelines are chock full of mock drafts. That is what we consume for most of our time before the NFL draft actually starts. And there's so many mock drafts these days to consume because the mock draft community has grown enormously over the years. It is a very popular activity to participate in, and it drives a lot of engagement because there's a lot of discussion to be had about it. So much so that you see a lot of mock draft analysts these days going version 5, version 6. I've even seen some people post version 7 of their mock drafts, which is insane in and of itself to think about, but that is the world that we live in today. Then, finally, we get the NFL draft itself. Day one arrives, and then after that, we've got 2 additional days of picks, and we watch our favorite teams pull players into their organization through the process. Then, the draft is over. So now what do? It's the first day with no picks since 4 days ago, and what activity do we now engage in, even though with the draft still being fresh in our mind? Well, if you've seen the thumbnail and clicked on this video, spoiler alert, it's draft grades. We're talking about whether it be individual grades for individual players in the first round or what have you, or just grading the draft class in general. And I am here to tell you today that draft grades, if they make you upset or they confirm a prior notion that you had previously, you don't have to get too worked up about them. I think draft grades at this point are something to be just consumed as entertainment and maybe not so much as analysis, because looking at draft grades, there is no real consensus about how these are assigned, if you will, because if you look around the internet and all of the mock draft analysts who are now suddenly mock draft graders, you see a wide variety of reports. Now, there is some overlap in terms of, consensus agreement, go figure. I think a lot of people right now are really giving some of the poorer grades out to the Atlanta Falcons, mostly because of the Michael Penix Jr. pick in the first round at number 8 overall. But for the most part, you're going to see a wide range of grades attached to these mock drafts or these specific picks. And I kind of personally don't think that that's necessary. Now, if that's something that you love to do is grade drafts and whatnot, if that's your thing, go for it. By all means, you do you. This is not a video to tell you to stop that because it's bad. I'm just kind of throwing out there into the universe that maybe this isn't something that you should take seriously if you're a fan of a team and you see your team get a grade that you think is not so deserving, if I could put it that way. If you think that the grade that an analyst gives your draft class is worse than what you would give it, I would say it's in the eye of the beholder, because it's such a subjective matter, because we have really nothing to go by. Don't forget that these are just prospects, and the only difference between 4 days ago and today with these prospects is we now know what teams they're going to play for. That is it. We don't know how the teams are going to use them. We don't know what their development plans are going to be like. All we know is that they've been assigned a city and they are going to go there this week. That's really the only difference between now and 4 days ago. So I wouldn't hang your hat too much on draft grades, especially if you see ones that upset you. And I wanted to go back in time for this video and look at Vikings draft class grades from previous years, specifically 2 that I picked out, I think are the most memorable draft classes for Vikings fans specifically. The first one being the Christian Ponder draft, which I think most people will look at and be like, dear God, that one is horrible outside of Kyle Rudolph. That one was in 2011. Christian Ponder went in the first round, Kyle Rudolph in the second. And then I don't think that there's too much of anything else in the rest of the draft. Brandon Fusco, maybe. I know he was here for multiple years, but overall a very forgettable draft class. And if it didn't have Kyle Rudolph, it would probably be one of the more worst ones in recent memory. So, and then the other one I wanted to look at was the 2015 draft, which I think a lot of people would agree is probably one of the better ones, because we always go back to that, right? Because we got, Kendricks, we got Danielle Hunter, Stephon Diggs. Those were the big names out of that draft class. It turned this defensive unit for the Vikings into one of the best 3 years later in 2017 and 2018. And, even Trey Waynes, I can't be too upset with that pick. Maybe in hindsight, it wasn't worth number 11 overall, but at the same time, he was a pretty decent contributor for his time with the Vikings. And we got a lot of mileage out of Trey Waynes and specifically the other 3 aforementioned names, which have most recently moved on to different teams. Danielle Hunter being, I think, the last remaining one from that draft class. So What I did was I went into Google and I just typed in Minnesota Vikings draft class 2014 grade. And I tried to pick, publications that still had that 2015 publication date on it. So here's what we're looking at. For the Christian Ponder draft, we're looking at a C plus grade from Bleacher Report. And this was posted at the time. This is not a regrade 3 years later. This is not a grade in hindsight. This was in the moment grading the draft class, and it got a C plus. I think now if we regraded it, it would probably get way less because the only thing holding it up is Kyle Rudolph. Moving on to the 2015 draft class, this is a post from SB Nation at the time, and they gave it a B minus. Now, if you were to ask me, there's not a big difference between a B minus and a C plus, which is probably an argument that most people have had bringing home a math test to their parents to explain themselves. Because if you got a C plus, I mean, it's, there's some work to be done, I'll admit, but at the same time, you're not too far off from that B minus. You could sort of spin it that way. So to look at these two draft class in a historical context, the Christian Ponder draft and the 2015 draft being just one letter grade away, it seems kind of unserious, And I'm not saying that the whole exercise is unserious. I'm just simply saying if you look at previous draft classes in the moment grades, and then the fact that we even need to, have a revisit to regrade them years later, I think it makes today and the next few days when you see these posts, don't get too upset about letter grades that have been assigned to specific picks or the Vikings draft class because it's arbitrary. At the end of the day, it's an arbitrary practice that is designed to create engagement, create discussion, and those things are all fine and wonderful. And I think that is a welcome thing within society is a way to create engagement amongst fans. I just think that the practice sort of brings out the worst in people, which is kind of why I'm like, just be careful. Don't worry about it too much. So I personally wouldn't grade the draft class this year or next year or the year before. Let's see how it pans out. If you want to talk about, was this player a reach? Was this player, a steal? Was this the right value? Was this trade lopsided? I think those are all great discussions in and of themselves at an individual level. But to assign letter grades, I think we're just getting a little too nitpicky with that practice. Again, if it's your cup of tea, it's your cup of tea. But that is my take on draft grades post NFL draft. Not my thing, but some people can't get enough of it. The same way that I can't get enough of mock drafts, even though they get more ridiculous the closer we get to the draft itself. Because how many of you saw, and maybe this is a different discussion for a different day, all the rumors about Justin Herbert potentially being traded to the Vikings, even though that was never going to happen given the cap hit that they would have incurred on themselves were they to do that, because it was just so significant that there was just no way they would be able to build a team that would be any sort of competitive at any sort of competitive level. So that's going to do it for me. Thank you very much for watching in this episode. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I will see you in the next one.